It's fiercely divided Americans for decades and has once again become an issue in the 2012 elections. We examine the issue of abortion rights in the current race and ask, have Republicans declared war on a woman's right to choose? You're watching Inside Story US 2012. Hello, I'm Shihan Brutansi. In today's Republican Party, a candidate's position on abortion plays a major role in whether or not he or she will win their party's nomination. In this election, the main focus of both campaigns was supposed to be the economy. But this Republican congressman's controversial comments once again brought women's reproductive rights to the forefront.
If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. But let's assume that maybe that didn't work or something. You know, I think there should be some punishment, but the punishment ought to be in the rapist and not attacking the child.
Romney and his running mate, Paul Ryan, distanced themselves from the comments, releasing a statement saying their administration would not oppose abortion in instances of rape. But the Obama campaign was quick to seize on Aiken's comments in order to present the Romney-Ryan ticket as anti-women, not least because Ryan himself co-sponsored legislation with Aiken further limiting federal funding for abortions to victims of, quote, forcible rape. But the issue of reproductive rights goes beyond the 2012 presidential campaign. Last year, 24 states passed provisions making it more difficult for women to obtain an abortion. Faultline's Zaina Awad traveled to the U.S. state of Ohio, where there's been an effort to restrict a woman's right to choose.
Pray the rosary and you'll choose life.
At the preterm abortion clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, protesters are offering women what they call sidewalk counseling.
No good will come of you entering this place of death and doom. No problems are solved here. Only greater problems are created.
Mommy, your baby wants to live.
It seems not fair, and it creates stigma, and it makes the women anxious, and it makes them feel like they're doing something wrong or bad, and they're not. They're doing the thing that is best for them, best for their families, best for their life.
Dr. Lisa Pereira has worked at preterm for 2 years. During that time, she's seen hundreds of women pass through the clinic's doors.
They are moms, and they're looking out for their families, and they know that they can't bring another child into the world. They're women that are trying to finish college and trying to make a better lives for themselves so that later on they can provide well for a family. They are women that have complicated pregnancies where they have babies that are very much desired. However, the baby is sick and won't survive outside of the womb, so they choose to terminate their pregnancy.
Deep breath in, blow it out.
One of Dr. Pereira's patients is a 16-year-old girl who became pregnant because of a broken condom.
And as you're getting nice and comfy, we're going to be setting up all of our instruments, okay?
Despite her family's strong Christian faith, they decided that abortion was the best choice. Her mother asked us not to show her face.
She went back and forth with, I'm going to have this child. And I could tell that when she did that because deep down inside, that's what we all want to do. That's nature. But she's 16. She hasn't completed her education. If my daughter were forced to have a child that she was not ready for, no one would be there to pick up those pieces in 5 years. It's so hard. Will God forgive me? That's what she said to me.
Almost 1 out of 3 women in the U.S. will have an abortion by the age of 45. Last year, across the country, Republican lawmakers tried to turn over 1,000 pieces of legislation into laws, all aimed at restricting abortion or reproductive rights.
Yeah, unfortunately that legislation has changed, trying to restrict things for women. You might be better off going to a clinic in either Michigan or Pennsylvania. I can give you
Here in Ohio, the state's Republican majority House of Representatives passed the so-called heartbeat bill, which would outlaw abortion as soon as a fetal heartbeat can be detected. That can sometimes be as early as 5 or 6 weeks after conception, before most women even know that they're pregnant. Representative Jim Beakey is one of the bill's co-sponsors.
I believe in the sanctity of life, and I am in support of any legislation that is going to reduce or eliminate abortions. I believe there should be no abortions, period, except in the threat of the life of the mother.
And ironically, it's called the heartbeat bill. I call it the heartless bill because it does not have any heart for women, and it really only sees a woman as a carrier, and she has no other right beyond her ability to reproduce.
State Senator Nina Turner is opposing the legislation. To become law, the bill must still be passed by the state Senate and signed by the governor.
One of the reasons, in my opinion, that these abortion bills are so insidious, so dangerous, is because it chips away at the notion of personal liberty, your right. And what can be more fundamental to your personal liberty than being able to control your own body?
What do you think makes a woman want to have an abortion?
Well, there's probably a lot of, I'm not a woman, so I'm thinking now, if I'm a woman, why would I want to, yeah. Some of it has to do with economics. A lot of it has to do with economics. I don't know, it's a question I've never even thought about.
We are survivors of the abortion Holocaust.
And you can watch Zaina's full Fault Lines report, The Abortion War, on Wednesday at 0930 GMT, that's 5:30 a.m. here in DC, or Thursday at 0330 GMT, 11:30 p.m. in DC. Or you can watch it anytime online at aljazeera.com. So how have Republicans defined women's rights? To discuss this, we're joined here in the studio by the author of Sex, Mum and God, Frank Schaeffer. And from New Hampshire, we're joined by Judy Norsigian, Executive Director of Our Bodies Ourselves. We had hoped to have a member of the Republicans for Choice group. That's an organization which advocates for abortion rights. Unfortunately, we've just been informed that she can't make it. So it's just the two of us then, Frank and Judy. Judy Norsigian then first. What do you make of that statement from the Ohio State Representative that we just heard, that he frankly had never even really stopped to consider why women have an abortion?
Well, let me begin by saying that Our Bodies Ourselves is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we take no role in electoral politics at all. We are an organization that tries to bring evidence-based information about health and sexuality to the American public. And of course, we've been long involved in the question of women's bodies, access to reproductive health. We have been what you would call a pro-choice organization for our more than 40 years of existence. But I have to say, there are so many reasons why women have abortions, and we can't even begin to go through all of them. I find it astounding that we have legislators, and they're really on both sides of the aisle, who don't stop and think sometimes about why. I spoke once with a priest who used to give an anti-abortion sermon every single year, and when one of his parishioners came in and shared with him why she had her abortion and why she felt so badly every time he gave that sermon, he stopped giving it because he understood something he never understood before. I think we all need to talk to women and to families where abortion decisions do get made, sometimes not to go ahead. It's a personal matter. It should be a personal decision, and the government really should not be interfering with this personal decision. That's been our view for a long time, but it's not a partisan issue. This is an issue that has to do with health and human rights and providing the best information to individuals and policymakers so that they can go ahead and make good decisions based on that information.
Frank Schaeffer, arguably you're one of those who in some ways made this a partisan issue in the 80s with your father and other figures within the Republican Party. When we hear Nina Turner in Zaina Awad's Fault Lines documentary there say that many of those who are advocating for limiting choice see a woman simply as a carrier of a baby with no other rights than reproduction. Does that sound familiar from your past experience?
Yeah, I mean, I came out of an evangelical religious right background, and my father, Francis Schaeffer, along with Dr. Sievert Koop, who then became Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, made a film series that I directed and wrote called Whatever Happened to the Human Race, that was really in the mid-1970s, the beginning of the evangelical anti-abortion movement. I moved away from that position and changed my mind. And so by the mid-'80s into the early '90s, I began to write and think and reconsider. And the book you mentioned, Sex, Mom, and God, is the story of why I got out of the religious right, how I changed my mind on this issue. So to get to your question, I think that what you have to understand is the evangelical side of the anti-abortion movement comes from a biblical position of taking the Old and New Testament literally. And one of the threads that runs through the Bible, unfortunately, is a thread of misogyny. Women are second-class citizens. And this has bled into the evangelical/religious pro-life movement. And so that attitude that women are there to be subservient to men and women are there to bear children, etc., bleeds into these political issues. And now the folks who take the anti-abortion position don't usually say that or admit it. But when you look, for instance, at the documentary that you all are going to be screening on Al Jazeera about this issue, the abortion wars, what you see coming through clearly in some of the comments from, I may say this as a white male, people my age, my gender, my color, that assumption of that comes with it, really have a powerful sense of misogyny, as if they were almost infantilizing women when they talk about them. And so the idea of giving people choice doesn't enter their minds, because as far as they're concerned, they run things as males, and the women in their lives are definitely subservient to them. And I think that really has to be understood. Otherwise, none of the pro-life work really makes sense to people if you don't get that misogynistic thread that's there at the heart of it.
And now we do have the Republican National Convention underway. The draft platform appears to have been leaked, though at the time of recording this program it hasn't been officially released yet, but it appears to include a constitutional amendment against abortion, giving the unborn 14th Amendment rights, equal protection under the law, and so forth. Although that is not Mitt Romney's opinion. In fact, it's not a bad thing, perhaps, to remind ourselves of Romney's position, because although he's now seen as a moderate simply for asking for an exemption for rape and incest, of course there was a time when the Republican Party wasn't quite that extreme, but here's Mitt Romney's quite impassioned position before he became the Republican nominee, while he was still fighting against Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts back in '94.
I believe that abortion should be safe and legal in this country. I have since the time that my mom took that position when she ran in 1970 as a U.S. Senate candidate. I believe that since Roe v. Wade has been the law for 20 years, that we should sustain and support it. And I sustain and support that law and the right of a woman to make that choice. And my personal beliefs, like the personal beliefs of other people, should not be brought into a political campaign. Many, many years ago, I had a dear, close family relative that was very close to me who passed away from an illegal abortion. It is since that time that my mother and my family have been committed to the belief that we can believe as we want, but we will not force our beliefs on others on that matter.
So that was Mitt Romney there. Since then, clearly his position has changed, and perhaps, interestingly, a great deal of attention has been placed on his nominee for vice president, Paul Ryan, who of course has a very different position, or at least did have a very different position. When asked about abortion cases of rape, Paul Ryan said that, quote, Mitt Romney is going to be the president sets the policy. His policy is for exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I'm comfortable with it because it's a good step in the right direction. I'll leave it at that. But in the past, Ryan has co-sponsored a strict anti-abortion bill with the controversial Todd Akin, who we've already been discussing, in the US Congress, in which the only rape victims exempt from abortion restrictions would be those subject to, quote, would have been those subject, quote, to forcible rape. A later version of the bill removed that term. Ryan and Akin also co-sponsored a personhood bill which declares that a fertilized egg has the same legal rights as a human being. Many birth control pills prevent a fertilized egg from implanting in a woman's uterus, so the bill implies that using many forms of oral contraception would be a crime. Judy, Norsigian, then, there's some confusion then as to what exactly is the presidential platform here, but what is the significance for the election of all this, do you think?
Well, I think we first have to remember that politicians, like human beings, can change their minds, and sometimes we don't really know what they think, we know what they say. I remember when we looked more deeply into Nancy Brinker's history around the issue of choice, she was very pro-choice, and then all of a sudden she seemed to change her tune in many ways. We don't know whether you're a politician or an average citizen, whether or not this year is going to represent what you say or believe next year. one thing we do have to understand is when that personhood amendment was introduced in Mississippi, one of the reasons it did not pass in the very end was because physicians finally realized that this is not just about misogyny, and I totally agree with what Frank said about misogyny being a core problem. This was also an attack on physicians and their ability to provide good medical care. What if a doctor were going to take care of a woman who had an ectopic pregnancy and feared being charged with a crime as a result? The governor of Mississippi understood because the physicians approached that governor and said, this is way too extreme, this is wrong. And I think what we're seeing now across the country is that more and more physicians are seeing that these various bills introduced in states across the country are not just attacks on women, they're attacks on physicians and their ability to provide what we would call evidence-based, science-based medicine. And that is why I think we're going to be seeing many more citizens who've been inactive on this debate coming out. They believe, for example, that contraception should be available, that we shouldn't be making fun of contraception or misrepresenting contraception. This is one of the central means that women and men have of avoiding pregnancy, and that's something we want to do. I believe personally that if one is against abortion, and there are many people, friends of mine including, who are against abortion on moral grounds, but most of them strongly support access to contraception because they see that as one of the central means for preventing an unwanted pregnancy.
Frank Schaeffer, then, I mean, is this then something different to what you and your father were attempting in the 70s and 80s then? This isn't simply a matter of the evangelical right getting dominance there. Is this perhaps part of conservatives trying to define themselves, one, as the Democrats move so further and further to the right, so there are clearer social issue distinctions between the Republicans and the Democrats. And as part of that, as we see in climate change and other issues, there is that understanding that perhaps science has been hijacked by the left and so forth. All the advances in the 70s and 80s on female reproductive health care, or even breast cancer and all these other things, which were relatively recent phenomena, are all thought of as part of some sort of liberal conspiracy of the 70s and 80s. It might not even be religious.
Yeah, well, what I think clearly what happened is back in the day when my father and I were at the beginning of the evangelical anti-abortion movement, we joined hands with a lot of Roman Catholics, like Archbishop Fulton Sheen of New York, who I met with in the 1970s, and we made common cause. At that point, we were outsiders knocking on the establishment door. So, for instance, we had meetings with the Bush family, with Gerald Ford, et cetera, and we would ask them to look at our issue being abortion, and incorporate some consciousness of it into the platform. The difference between what's going on now with the Republican Party and what we were doing then is in those days we were outsiders and agitators coming, like any other pressure group, with a list of requests. It is as if we wound up taking over the Republican Party. The outsiders are no longer petitioning a normal political party. They are now the party. So between the Tea Party, of which about 60% are evangelical Christians, according to polls, between the extremists that have taken over even the anti-abortion movement, now moving the goalposts and starting to include contraceptives, as for instance the Roman Catholic bishops have, by trying to force the administration to not provide insurance coverage through Roman Catholic institutions for women. When you look at this, you realize that the pro-life movement fed into an extremist right-wing movement, which has taken over the Republican Party, in my view. And so it goes far beyond the original issue that we tried to exercise some political rights over, which was abortion itself. And now it really gets into what I guess, even though it's a cliche now, could be called an attack on women. And this has become a political marker, if you would, from the right. So all of a sudden, it's not just women and abortion, it's women and contraceptives. It's trying to make sure women don't have access to contraceptives. It's taking away family leave benefits. It's attacking medical institutions like Planned Parenthood. Only 3% of what they do has anything to do with abortion. The rest of it is to provide breast cancer screenings, cervical screenings, and so forth. And you brought in global warming. When you bring in the business interests, the Koch brothers and the other people, the religious side that used to be about life all of a sudden has bought into the Wall Street agenda as well, deregulating the banks, deregulating the oil and coal industry. Why? Not because this has anything to do with pro-life issues, but it has to do with people who are financing the movement, financing their candidates. And so what started out as genuinely a pro-life movement, whether you agree or not is not the point, in which we were agitators knocking on the politician's door, has taken over the political process as far as the Republican Party goes. And now the outsiders are the insiders, and they've gone even further to the right, and now they're sweeping all these other right-wing issues and mythologies, like there's no global warming, a similar mythology that a fertilized egg is a human being. All of a sudden, these become articles of faith, as if somehow this is part of biblical faith. So the line between anti-science, Christianity, political activism has become so blurred in America that really the Republican, the only last step they can take now is to push overtly for some sort of theocracy, which would be their final step in this direction. And I'm not saying that would happen, but that's definitely the path we're on.
And as Judy Norsigian suggested, I mean, we're not sure how much Mitt Romney buys into this and other members.
I don't think he buys into any of it.
But nonetheless,
this is maybe a good moment to say something about the fact that women experience attacks on their ability to protect themselves, to seek out reproductive health services from many corners. It isn't just from Republicans.
Right.
What we're concerned about is that women have good information with which they will make these decisions, personal and political. And we recently started an Our Bodies, Our Votes campaign and hope that younger women in particular who seem to be totally disengaged from politics will take the time to learn what they need to see which legislators, which politicians support their right to health services that they believe they should have, and that they would then be educated as educated voters to follow their beliefs and to be active. I can tell you, it disturbs me to meet many 18 and 19-year-old young women and men who tell me they haven't registered to vote and they don't plan to register to vote because politics is boring, and I've heard that more than once. So one of the reasons we started this Our Bodies, Our Votes campaign is to help young women think of politics as not just boring, but something central to their lives, and that it's your civic duty to know what's going on, to think about who is running for office, and you make an informed decision based upon your own beliefs. And that's something we believe very strongly.
Frank Schaeffer.
We're hoping that...
Sorry, Judy, we're beginning to run out of time. But Frank, I mean, although it's true that we can't tell how much Mitt Romney buys into this rather extreme platform, and I'm told that actually the Republican National Committee has now adopted that platform that we mentioned earlier, banning abortion in all cases. Jeffrey Toobin at The New Yorker, the legal writer, says that even though we're not sure of Romney's exact position, given that he's now said that his judicial appointments, particularly Supreme Court appointments, will be governed by his position of no abortion. Is this now the biggest and clearest distinction between the two political parties in this election?
Well, I think it's certainly the one that the Republicans have decided to make the clearest distinction. They keep talking about the economy with one hand, but in terms of their legislative program across the country on state level, for instance, it all seems to be about abortion. But I want to say one other thing. I come from an evangelical background, and I know a lot of people in that, and I have continued to speak at colleges, including some evangelical schools occasionally that will still have me. The interesting thing is there's also a generational divide on this. So I don't want to say all evangelicals believe this, or that all evangelicals will vote Republican. They won't. Or that all evangelicals are anti-woman. They are not. For instance, this summer I was a speaker at something called the Wild Goose Festival that was taking place down in the South, in the Bible Belt. A festival run by progressive evangelicals who would be sitting here at this table very much on my side on these issues. So I'm not talking about evangelical Christianity. I am talking about the evangelicals who have politicized their faith to the point where their agenda is no longer Christ or following Jesus or trying to live according to biblical rules. Their agenda is strictly political, and they have swapped it. Their real religion is politics, and the religion is simply the cherry on the cake that they use to attract people. Those are the folks I'm talking about, not evangelicals in general or all religious Americans. And the same applies to the Roman Catholics in this country, many of whom are pro-choice, many of whom believe in contraceptives, most of whom use contraceptives. So yeah, a distinction has to be made between the politicizers who have hijacked a religious movement and the religious movement itself. And I just wanted to add that, otherwise it's an unfair characterization.
We do have a few more issues to cover.
I totally agree with you.
I wonder whether we can actually have an extended version for our internet viewers. So I'll probably be saying goodbye to our TV viewers in a moment, but then we'll record a bit more for our version on aljazeera.com. But very briefly, Judy, when we use this term war on women, don't we have to accept the fact, though, that according to the Pew survey, it's pretty evenly split amongst women about whether abortion should be allowed or not under all circumstances. Actually, we're going to leave that there for our internet for our internet edition, but that's it for our TV edition. Do log on to aljazeera.com where you can see an extended version of this show. All right, so this is the extended version of Inside Story US 2012 on this issue of abortion and the election. Judy, what about this point then, about the term war on women? Given that, according to the Pew Institute, the population is split 50-50, but even amongst women as to the rights and wrongs of abortion.
Well, I'll tell you something. I saw a recent poll. It's actually a result of some focus groups where women who are struggling economically knew nothing about this terminology, war on women, and they weren't even moved by what they heard. They're mostly trying to make ends meet, put food on the table, get their kids into school. I don't think this is terminology that is as widely used as one might think, but there's no question that we are now facing draconian public policies that could harm women at all levels. And it's one reason why women have to pay attention to what is going on in the public sphere. When you look at the role of married women versus unmarried women, obviously unmarried women tend to be much more progressive in their voting. They also tend to be more disengaged. I think of all the cohorts out there, this group of young unmarried women have the highest rate of non-participation, and it's gone down. 2008 it wasn't so bad. 2010 it was pretty bad, and projections are that these unmarried women are going to vote even in fewer numbers in 2012. And I find that disengagement so alarming. These are women who should be involved, should pay attention to matters that affect them at the most basic level, and for them to think politics is boring is really a crying shame.
But I mean, would a more accurate term, though, perhaps both when it comes to abortion rights and the economy, for that matter, is a war on poor women? I wonder, Frank Schaeffer, because I mean, not only then, I mean, rich women historically do have will find some sort of channel.
Well, Judy will know these
reproductive health needs, perhaps, but it's the poor women who will suffer the most. And actually, it's often those politicians who are agitating the most against abortion who are also agitating to cut back social programs at the same time.
Which is really ironic, because there's a couple things here, and Judy will know these numbers better than me, but from the statistics I've read from the Guttmacher Institute, for instance, the highest incidence of abortion is in economically restricted circles where you have people who are not offered health care, they're not offered child care, they often don't have a complete education. Now, that's not why women get abortions, but if you just want to look at numbers, one of the highest areas where you find an incidence of abortion being used the most is in an underprivileged demographic, which brings something to mind, and that is one of the things that I say in my book, Sex, Mom, and God, that is if the Republican Party was serious about a literal pro-life agenda, in other words, wanting to encourage births of children and take care of them, they would be the one who would have insisted on a single-payer healthcare system and backed Barack Obama in his reform of healthcare.
Barack Obama advocated a single-payer system.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what they would have been asking for that. They would have been asking for a social welfare net to be increased to really help women with children, single
payer
moms
should
and so forth.
Taking the profit out of
exactly. And the fact of the matter is, you know, you cannot do both. You can't be, look, the Republicans do three things that contradict each other. They say they're pro-life, but they're against the social safety net. They say they're pro-life, but they're against comprehensive sex education. And abstinence only does not cut it. If you were pro-life, you would have comprehensive sex education backed up by a social safety net that would help especially women who have economic hardships and problems. You'd have a pro-family orientation of legislation for family leave, for child care, and other benefits. And you would find that the incidence of abortion in this country would begin to drop and become more commensurate with some Western European countries that have a much lower rate, even though they're a much more secular society. So on paper, if it's all about religion, they ought to have higher abortion rates. They have lower rates because they have a real social safety net. It's as simple as that.
But Judy Norsigian, again, in the context of the presidential campaign, does this get President Obama off the hook, or at least efforts to push him to perhaps bolder action to address not just issues of female reproductive rights, but of poverty and the social safety net and everything else for women as well, just because the Republicans have become so extreme on these issues. There has been, I mean, there are those on the left who say President Obama hasn't been bold enough on some of these issues as far as poverty are concerned, and female poverty in particular. Not to mention he overruled his FDA on the morning after pill and availability and so forth. So, I mean, are there problems?
I actually don't know what President Obama is going to do. I do know that as an African-American man, he has been dealing with racism at the deepest level, and I think it really curtails what he can do on many issues. So I'm not going to anticipate what he's going to do. I will go back to what Frank said and point out that he's right. This has had a disproportionate impact on poorer women. And you think about the Hyde Amendment back in the 70s, which was a horrible assault on poor women, having taken its toll. And I'm so proud to be from the state of Massachusetts, which has had state-funded Medicaid abortions. And as a result, we have not seen so many of the problems that other states have seen, and that we see low-income women better supported in their reproductive choices. We also are very active in supporting access to midwifery care, evidence-based childbearing practices. We want to see women at all stages supported in their decisions and getting the best health care possible. We want to see that for-profit interests don't inappropriately intervene and affect good public policy decisions that ought to be made. This isn't just about abortion. It's really about a lot of different issues, and it's not just about Republicans. I think that it's going to be a catchy thing to say we've got this war on women, and yes, of course, we can use that terminology. But it really, at rock bottom, we have to have citizens well-informed with accurate information and thinking, what do they want? What kind of a country do they want to live in? And who do they want to be their leaders? And our job is to make sure the best information gets out there. And I'm really happy to see Frank has done an immense amount of research himself.
Judy Norsigian, thank you very much. Frank Schaeffer, thank you too.
Thank you.
And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.